I'm Jenn Giardino. I'm a user experience designer at Red Hat.
And I'm Vince Conzola. I'm also a user experience designer at Red Hat. And both Jen and I work on a product called Red Hat OpenShift AI, or ROI, as it's also known. And ROI helps organizations doing AI manage the life cycle of the models they use, everything from model training and customization through model deployment and monitoring models in production. And our primary users are data scientists, ML ops engineers, and app developers slash AI engineers who are incorporating AI models into the intelligent applications that they're creating. Rory runs on top of OpenShift as an operator. OpenShift is Red Hat's productized Kubernetes offering and can run anywhere from public clouds to customers' own data centers. Just so we know who's in the audience, and I think I know the answer to this probably already, but how many of you are familiar with open source software and how open source communities work? Okay, you all probably know a lot more about it than I do, but just for the sake of the recording, just talk briefly about the difference between upstream and downstream. Upstream is the source repository, usually in Git, and it's a project where contributions happen and decisions are made. It's where all the code is created and managed, and it's where it's stored before being used by other products. And contributions flow from upstream to downstream. And by downstream, we mean the projects or products that use and modify the upstream code. By an upstream community, we're talking about the people. They're the people, mostly developers and other users, who maintain the code and collaborate to govern and contribute to the project. They're responsible for making key decisions, reviewing the code and maintaining it, and setting the direction of the project and making sure that it's healthy and flourishing for all the other users who use the code that they're creating. For Roy, the immediate upstream project is called Open Data Hub, or ODH. And like Roy, it's also packaged as an operator for OpenShift or Kubernetes, and is a platform for managing model life cycles at scale that run across hybrid cloud environments. ODH is the project in which all of the code is developed, and then it's productized with Red Hat branding in Red Hat OpenShift AI. And while it's an upstream project for Roy, ODH isn't a really truly an upstream project, because it integrates a number of other upstream components into a single platform. In fact, last I knew, there were at least 30 upstream projects, and it's probably a lot more than that now, that provide components to ODH. So we consider ODH, from the Roy standpoint, we consider ODH a midstream project. And of those 30 plus projects that contribute to ODH, one of those is called Kubeflow, and that's the project and community we're going to talk about today. Kubeflow, it's an upstream project, and it provides several components that get integrated together into the ODH platform. Like I said, ODH is the midstream, and then OpenShift AI is the downstream product. So, a little bit about the Kubeflow community. By open source standards, Kubeflow is a fairly small community with around 150 members and 2,000 followers. By comparison, the Linux kernel community has over 11,000 contributors from almost 1,800 companies, and it's been forked over 57,000 times. Kubeflow is made up of 7 sub-projects. There's Kubeflow pipelines for automating the workflow of open models, AI ML models. There's Kubeflow notebooks, similar to Jupyter notebooks. There's a central dashboard, and then there are also components for model training, automated machine learning, model serving, and there's also a model registry. And model registry is what our story is about today, how we engaged with the Kubeflow Model Registry Working Group within the community on a research project. take a quick sip here. Oops, sorry. So you can think of a model registry as the bridge between model experimentation, customization, training, and then model running in production to be consumed by AI applications. It's a central index or database for managing the life cycle of models, their versions, and also their metadata. The primary users of a model registry are data scientists who are doing the development of the models and evaluating different versions of the models as they're doing the development, and figuring out which is the best model to use. MLOps engineers, they use the model metadata to configure deployment environments to make those models available for evaluation, and then to deploy a champion model into production environment. And finally, business analysts use model registries to monitor deployed models and their performance and outputs to make business decisions. Now Jenn is going to talk about the research project we initiated with the Kubeflow model registry community.
Yeah, so as UX designers, one of the things that we support is user research. And when we were discussing UX improvements we could make to model registry, we realized that there were some research that we should do. So revisiting Vince's previous explanation for what a model registry is, it allows for the management of models and versions and their associated metadata. And we had some previous user conversations that produced some insight that the navigation path to a model version was challenging. But we had different opinions about how to solve that usability issue. So to provide some context for the UI that we're talking about, this is the model registry landing page. You can see it's a list of models. And if I click on a model, it takes me to this page, which then shows a list of versions. And then if I click on a version, I then see a page that shows the metadata for that model version. And we believed that this was the object that people cared about the most because it's the artifact that the data scientists are creating. It's the artifact that the MLOps engineers are deploying. And so if we step back, you can see the full flow of the list of models going to the list of versions and then going to the version metadata. But then there's also model metadata, and that's available from the model details page as well. And maybe that's also important, but we weren't really sure how important that is relative to the version and the version metadata. But the suggestion that was being made was that we should just go directly to the version page with the version metadata, specifically the latest version, because now the user would have fewer clicks to get to that object that they cared about the most. But as we discussed this idea, some of the questions that come up were, do users really only care about the latest version? What if they need to get to another version? Would the new flow make it more challenging to find previous versions of the model? And really, how important is the model metadata? So this is where user research comes in. Research lets us test these flows to understand what's important to users and why, so that we can make those UX decisions with more confidence. So Vince is going to talk about what we did.
All right. So there are different types of user research that you can do, and those different types require different techniques. In this case, we were doing design validation research. We wanted to validate the assumptions that Jenn talked about the latest version metadata being the critical objects that users cared the most about and that users expected and desired to have a shortcut navigation path to. So we created a research plan to test our assumptions and answer questions about how users actually navigate through the model registry UI. The second thing you need when doing model research, once you have a plan, is you need research materials. And when doing research, you can do validation research, especially with lots of different kinds of test materials. Anything from hand-drawn sketches to fully functioning software applications. Typically, the more specific the research question is that you're trying to answer, the higher fidelity of materials you want to use. In our case, we decided that an interactive prototype that simulated the proposed navigation pattern, the shortcut from the model list to the model version details and metadata, we decided that a prototype that simulated that proposed navigation pattern is what we needed. So one of our colleagues created a prototype of that UI in Figma. The third thing you need when doing, the third thing you need when doing research is participants. And one of, if not the biggest challenge when doing user research for enterprise software products is finding qualified participants. So if you're doing research on a consumer application or a streaming service like Netflix or Spotify, if you're doing research on their UIs, or on a consumer-oriented application or website like Airbnb, the pool of potential participants is huge. It's almost unlimited. There are millions and millions and millions of people who use those applications. But when researching enterprise software, which requires very specific skills and experience, the pool is often quite small. And this is especially true when doing research in emerging technologies like AI. So for our study, we decided that we specifically wanted people who had experience or at least familiarity with using AI/ML model registries. As you can imagine, finding people like this was like looking for a needle in a haystack. So we decided to engage the Kubeflow community to try to recruit participants. Almost by definition, members of the community, and especially members of the Model Registry Working Group, fit the participant profile we are looking for exactly. They're working in that space, so they should be familiar and have interest in providing feedback on the designs for those areas. So enter Eder Ignatowicz. Eder is the UI lead for Model Registry and Notebook Working Groups within Kubeflow, and he's also the lead for the Model Machine Learning Experience Working Group in Kubeflow. And he also happens to be an engineer on the Red Hat OpenShift AI team. So it was perfect, very, very lucky for us that he had those deep connections into the community. So what we did was, working with Eder, we first created a screener survey and a self-scheduling calendar. So the screener survey was to make sure that people who did sign up for the research had the background that we were looking for. So we asked them about their experience using model registries and how familiar they were with them. And then through Eder, we were able to attend the community meetings for first the Model Registry Working Group. And we were hoping that we could get a number of people just from that group because they were really the core participants that we wanted. But because of the time of the year we were doing this and some other factors, those meetings weren't really hugely attended. And so we didn't make much progress there. And so our next step was to go to the larger Kubeflow community meetings. And I think you presented there, talked about the research we wanted to do and how we needed participants and how it was important for the community as a whole. So we presented there. Eder also got us mentions in a couple of blogs that are available on the Kubeflow website for community members to read. So we publicized or promoted the study through blogs, through attending meetings, and then finally, Eder personally invited some members of the community who he knew would be good fits for the type of people we were looking for to participate in the research. In the end, we got about a handful of people, which for the type of research we were doing was probably sufficient. It would have been good to get a few more. We augmented those with a few Red Hat people who were familiar with model registry and model registries in general. And so we got enough people to complete our study. And Jenn is going to talk about the study itself.
Yes, so while we were working to recruit users, we were also working on preparing our materials for the study. And for one of the research questions that we had, the one that I described earlier, we decided to create an interactive prototype Testing how users interact with a prototype would let us understand their expectations when navigating between these pages. And with a prototype, we can observe what they click on and ask if the page they see matches what they expect to see. But then, because we wanted to have participants from the community, there were some things that we needed to consider when we created the prototype. So we know the Kubeflow community members are not using OpenShift AI, and they also aren't using the Open Data Hub version of the Model Registry UI. They use the Kubeflow version of Model Registry, and there are several differences between this UI and the one that we typically are designing for Open Data Hub or OpenShift AI. So one of the main differences is the navigation panel on the left, different set of pages, different look, and then there's also different branding in the Kubeflow version of the UI. And they use a different design system, so the styles look different from what we typically use. So when we were creating our prototype in Figma, we considered those differences. So for the navigation, we just blurred it out. It wasn't necessary for our test to have a completely different navigation from what these participants would be familiar with, and it isn't worth wasting the time to have them focus on that during the session. So the simplest thing to do is for us to just blur it out so it's not an area that they would focus on during the sessions. We also removed the branding from our prototype. So it still looks more like the Open Data Hub or OpenShift AI version of the UI, but we did not include that branding in there. And then the styles, we ignored the style differences. For the amount of time we had to prepare these materials, we didn't really have time to create a new design system that matched what the Kubeflow community members were using. And we weren't really concerned about that aspect either, because we were testing the interaction patterns, and those would be the same between the two design systems that are used in the two projects. So then we created that prototype, we ran our research. We had other activities that we did during the research sessions, but when we were done with the research, we did want to share the results of our research back with this community. Because this was our first time engaging with this community in this way, and it's something that we want to be able to continue doing. And so for them to understand that if they participate in this research, there will be something that comes out of it that gets shared back to the community is important for them to know, so that they are inclined to volunteer in the future. So at this time, we had a researcher who was available to help take the findings from our sessions and the transcripts and produce a report for us. And so we had a researcher on our team, Mark. He created the report. He shared it internally at Red Hat. But before we could share these findings with the community, there were some things that we needed to change with that report. So one, you can see obviously is the theme and the slide deck is different. The one that our researcher created is based on the theme that we use for our internal presentations at Red Hat. But we wanted the theme of the report we shared with the community to reflect that community branding. But there's also another aspect that we had to consider when we shared the results with this community. So when a UX researcher shares results internally, they're presenting them to the product management team, engineering, and also designers. And they're providing recommendations that designers would then incorporate into the next iteration of the designs that they're creating. But as Vince mentioned, in the Kubeflow community, that audience, they're primarily engineers. And so providing them with just a set of research recommendations, it's not very actionable for that audience. So for this report that we created for this community, we also took the design recommendations that our designer pulled out of the research recommendations, and we included those as part of the report so that this community would have something that is much more actionable for them in incorporating those recommendations into the next iteration of the UI. And so once we had that report ready to share, we joined a community meeting to share those results. And again, this is where having those allies already in the community to help guide us was really helpful. I think at this time, Eder was on PTO, but he pointed me to a few other individuals at Red Hat who were also very active in that community. And they were able to help me figure out which would be the best community meeting to attend. I think over the summer, it's just some meetings don't get as much attendance, so I ended up sharing it at the broader community meeting. And then also, after sharing it at the meeting, they have other places where you can share things with the community. So the Slack channel, I shared a link to the slides there and described the work that we had done. I also shared it out on the community mailing list. And so, as I mentioned, this was our first time doing this type of activity. We learned a lot in doing this, learned a lot from the allies that we had in the community. And there was definitely some takeaways that I had that I think are worth remembering and also just passing along to other people in my team, just so that as we start to engage in this more in the future, that we kind of keep these things in mind. So one, obviously, is just knowing who your allies in that community are. They're super beneficial to any newcomer. It takes a lot of time to foster that trust and those relationships with the Upstream community. And so if they've already developed those, then they can help you with knowing how to navigate that community. The other thing is knowing your audience, which I think as a UX designer, that's a pretty basic thing that we do anytime we're creating anything. It's knowing who are we creating it for. But it was something that kind of came up multiple times over the course of this effort, as we're creating the research materials and as we're presenting the findings back to them, just understanding who we were engaging with and how they might react to different materials differently. And then obviously community is all about contributing back. So we learned so much by engaging with them, but it's important for us to also then share what we learned back to the community as a whole. So that's it for our presentation.
Any questions? Yes.
Did you face any opposition or sort of resistance to any of the in the community? And if you did, how did you kind of navigate around that?
Okay. So the question was whether we faced any resistance from the community to our involvement. Is that?
Yes.
I would say not, but Eder did a really good job of warning us beforehand, of making sure that we weren't making it clear that we weren't doing this research for Red Hat, that we were doing it on behalf of the community. And so that's why Jenn stressed the importance of like taking the Red Hat branding out of the materials we used and things like that, just so it looked like it was apparent that we were doing it for the community. I think if we were to do this in the future with other communities, and hopefully we will, we should really try to get involved in the communities earlier, not just like show up like, we're here, we want to do research for you, but actually start attending community meetings earlier, getting to know some of the members.
Yeah. I mean, definitely the things that we talked about, the things we did to make our prototype suitable for the community and the report suitable for the community. A lot of that was just Eder's advice on don't include branding, but also like you have to include your designs with the research.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Thanks, Kevin. I was curious, were any takeaways from this research? Was it used to inform the changes that are going into Open Data Hub as well as data science, or does it also feed into Kubeflow UI itself? So I guess how do you end up using this information, and which one of those product or projects did you influence?
Yeah. So the
Remember to repeat the question.
okay. Kevin, can you repeat the question? What's the short version of the question that I can repeat?
Thank you. Thank you very much. No, so yeah, just very short and sweet. Given the takeaways from the research, which one of the projects did it end up influencing? Was it Kubeflow, Open Data Hub, or OpenShift AI, or maybe all of them?
Yeah, so the engineering team, specifically the front end team, is actively working on getting the UI components implemented in the Kubeflow community, because I think right now there's some a duplication of UI development, and the goal is we build the UI in Kubeflow, and then we consume it in Open Data Hub, and then we consume it in OpenShift AI from Open Data Hub. So I don't know if you were in a recent meeting, but I did see one of our UI developers demo the Kubeflow version of the UI. And I should have probably included an example of that here. I think I did, and then deleted it for time. But it was really cool to see at least the Kubeflow version of that UI based on the design recommendations there.
The timing of the research was kind of interesting because while we were doing the research, it was at the same time model registry hadn't been being developed upstream yet, and they were going through that process of changing from downstream development to upstream development. So our timing, I guess it was either really good or I guess it was really good because we were a little bit ahead of them, so they were able to incorporate those changes.
Yeah.
Pretty much all the development for OpenShift AI is done either at one of the upstream communities or in ODH. Nothing is developed purely for OpenShift AI.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty important to really emphasize. I think you guys did a great job around that. We're building for the community, not it's not for the purpose of Red Hat. It's trying to develop or improve their experience, and if that benefits other products, that's a good thing.
Awesome. I think you were saying earlier when we were talking that that's something we want to try and do more widely on our product.
Yeah, so even just with Kubeflow, there are other components that we're, I think another one that we're actively trying to engage with them on is the notebooks work. And then, I think that's kind of the other thing that we've been doing quite a bit of this year.
Any other questions?
Have you found that this effort has resulted in any of the engineers, maybe at Red Hat, who have then connected to the Upstream community and have stayed as members in the Upstream community?
Engineers, not that I know of. I mean, Eder was already involved. I think, were you talking about Mike, the UI developer?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mike has become, within the last month, I think he's now a contributor to the community. And I think there's a few other members of the model registry development team who are now on their way to becoming members of the community. They're not contributors yet. I think they're reviewers.
Yeah, I saw a few team members as contributors.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, and from UX standpoint, I try to attend the meetings when I can, the community meetings, but it's not always easy.
So I just have a question. How do you get started with the Kubeflow community? Where do you find them? Where do you?
They have a Slack channel, right?
Yeah, so they have a Slack channel. They have a webpage. I mean, you could Google it and find their webpage that talks about the community. Like they have a community calendar that lists the different meetings that they have. So I don't have a link to that page in the slides, but I can add it and update that in the slides that we share.
All right, thank you.